March 8th, 2014. Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 was flying from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing with 239 people on board when at 1:19 in the morning, the captain sent his final words. "Good night, Malaysian 370. Minutes later, the Boeing 777 disappeared from civilian radar. There was no distress call, no emergency signal, and no clear explanation. But MH370 had not simply vanished. The aircraft had changed direction and continued flying into the night, leaving the world with one of the greatest aviation mysteries ever recorded.
In the modern age, a passenger aircraft is never truly alone. Every flight is surrounded by systems designed to monitor its movement, communicate its position, and guide it safely across the world. That is why the disappearance of MH370 shocked aviation experts. This was not a small aircraft lost over an unknown region. It was a Boeing 777, one of the world's most advanced commercial airplanes, carrying hundreds of passengers on an international route. Yet, after that final communication, the aircraft seemed to disappear from the world. Investigators discovered that the story was far more complicated than a simple accident. The aircraft had changed course. Satellite data suggested it continued flying for hours. And years later, pieces of debris would be discovered thousands of kilometers away. But even with these clues, the most important question remained unanswered. What happened during the final hours of Malaysia Airlines Flight 370?
Before MH370 became one of the greatest mysteries in aviation history, it was simply a normal flight. On the evening of March 8th, 2014, passengers arrived at Kuala Lumpur International Airport, expecting an ordinary journey. Some were traveling for business. Some were returning home. Others were beginning trips they had planned for months. They checked their luggage, passed through the terminal, and waited for their flight just like millions of travelers do every day. The aircraft waiting for them was Malaysia Airlines Flight 370, a Boeing 777 designed for long-distance international travel. It was a reliable aircraft that had completed thousands of flights around the world. Nothing about that night suggested anything unusual. The passengers boarded, the crew prepared the aircraft, and shortly after midnight, MH370 began its journey toward Beijing. For everyone on board, it was simply another flight. They had no idea that this would become a mystery the world would spend years trying to solve.
For the first part of the flight, everything appeared normal. MH370 climbed to its cruising altitude and followed its planned route toward Beijing. The pilots communicated with air traffic controllers, and there was no indication that anything was wrong. Then, at 1:19 in the morning, the aircraft sent its final communication. "Good night, Malaysian 370. The message was calm, routine, a phrase that sounded like any other transmission made during thousands of flights around the world. But moments later, something changed. The aircraft's transponder stopped transmitting. The system used by civilian radar to identify the aircraft went silent. To air traffic controllers, MH370 had disappeared. A Boeing 777 carrying 239 people was no longer visible. But the aircraft had not simply vanished. Somewhere in the darkness, MH370 was still flying.
When MH370 disappeared from civilian radar, investigators first faced a terrifying possibility. Had the aircraft crashed? Had a sudden emergency occurred? But then, another source of information revealed something unexpected.
Military radar data showed that MH370 had not vanished where the world first thought. The aircraft had turned. Instead of continuing toward Beijing, it changed direction and crossed back over the Malaysian peninsula. This discovery changed the entire investigation. MH370 was not simply an aircraft that disappeared. It was an aircraft that appeared to have continued flying along a different path. But that created a new mystery. Why did the aircraft change direction? Was it caused by a technical failure? Was someone controlling the aircraft? Or was there another explanation hidden inside the missing hours? The world now knew one thing for certain. MH370 was lost. But it was not random.
When news of MH370's disappearance reached the world, many believed the aircraft would soon be found. After all, how could a modern Boeing 777 simply disappear? Families waited for updates. Investigators searched for answers. And every possible clue created a moment of hope. But as hours became days, the search became more complicated. The aircraft's last known movements pointed investigators away from its original route and toward one of the most remote areas on Earth. The search expanded across enormous sections of ocean. Aircraft scanned from above. Ships crossed thousands of kilometers of water. Countries around the world joined the effort. But the Indian Ocean presented a challenge unlike any previous aviation search. The area was vast, the waters were deep, and somewhere beneath that endless ocean, MH370 remained hidden. For the families waiting at home, the hardest part was not knowing.
For weeks, investigators searched for answers with very little information. Then, they discovered something unexpected. Although MH370's normal communication systems had stopped, the aircraft had continued exchanging automated signals with a satellite operated by Inmarsat. These signals were not messages. They did not reveal the aircraft's exact location. They were simply routine electronic connections between the aircraft and the satellite. But after the disappearance of MH370, those small signals became one of the most important clues in aviation history. Scientists analyzed the timing of each transmission and studied how the signals changed as the aircraft moved. From this data, investigators created possible flight paths. The results revealed something remarkable. MH370 had remained airborne for hours after disappearing from radar. The aircraft was still flying, somewhere beyond normal tracking systems. The satellite had provided a clue, but it also created an even bigger mystery. If investigators knew the aircraft was still in the sky, where exactly had it gone?
As investigators studied the evidence, one difficult reality became clear. There were many possible explanations for MH370, but none could answer every question. One possibility was a catastrophic technical failure. An emergency on board the aircraft could explain why communication systems stopped working. But it did not fully explain the change in direction. The aircraft had not simply continued on its original route. It had turned. This led investigators to consider whether human actions played a role. The unusual flight path raised questions about possible deliberate control of the aircraft. But once again, important answers were missing. There was no confirmed motive, no complete evidence trail, no explanation that could be proven. Other possibilities were also considered, including outside interference or other unknown events. But each theory faced the same problem. It could explain certain parts of the mystery, but not the entire story. The evidence showed what MH370 did, but after all these years, the world still does not know why.
With satellite data pointing toward the southern Indian Ocean, the search entered one of the most challenging environments on Earth. The area was enormous. Thousands of kilometers of open water with no nearby land and almost no immediate clues. But the challenge was not only above the surface. Deep beneath the ocean was a landscape that remained largely unknown. The seabed contained mountains, valleys, and extreme depths that made searching incredibly difficult. Teams used advanced sonar equipment to scan areas where humans could never directly reach. Ships crossed the ocean for months. Aircraft searched from above. Technology was pushed to its limits. Yet the ocean revealed almost nothing. The disappearance of MH370 showed a difficult reality. Even with satellites watching from space and some of the most advanced search equipment ever created, finding an aircraft beneath the world's largest oceans remained an enormous challenge. The plane had crossed the sky in hours, but discovering where it ended could take years.
After months of searching, the investigation finally found something that changed everything. On July 29, 2015, a piece of aircraft debris washed ashore on Reunion Island, thousands of kilometers from the original search area. The object was a damaged aircraft component known as a flaperon. After examination, investigators confirmed what many had feared. It belonged to MH370. For the first time since the disappearance, the world had physical evidence connected to the aircraft. The discovery confirmed that MH370 had most likely ended somewhere in the southern Indian Ocean. But instead of solving the mystery, it created a new question. If part of the aircraft had been found, where was the rest? Where was the main wreckage? Where were the flight recorders that could reveal what happened? The debris had answered one question. MH370 was gone. But it still could not answer the question the world wanted most. Why?
More than a decade after MH370 disappeared, the world understands more than it did on that first night. Investigators know the aircraft changed direction. They know it continued flying after disappearing from civilian radar. They know fragments of the aircraft reached distant shores. But the most important answers remain hidden. For the families of the 239 people on board, MH370 is not just an aviation mystery. It is an unfinished story, a question that has remained open for years. New searches continue to be considered. New technology creates new possibilities. And every discovery brings back the same hope, that one day the final answers will finally be found. But until that moment comes, one question remains. What truly happened during the final hours of Malaysia Airlines Flight 370?
The disappearance of MH370 changed aviation forever. It exposed the limits of modern technology and reminded the world that even today, some questions remain unanswered. But beyond every investigation, every search, and every theory, there are 239 people whose journey never reached its destination. Perhaps one day, the ocean will reveal what it has kept hidden for so many years. Until then, Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 remains one of the greatest unsolved mysteries of the modern age. A story that continues to challenge investigators and continues to remind us that history does not always leave behind clear answers.